I don't think we think in terms of 20, 25-year increments, and I think that actually comes pretty naturally to China. There was great success in integrating the world. I like this quote, where commerce doesn't cross through borders, armies do. And that was sort of what Pax Americana was built on after World War II. We didn't have to help Germany after defeating the Nazis. We didn't have to help the Japanese, but we did. America did that with West Germany, with Taiwan, with Korea, with Japan, and the result was really building up this thriving global capitalist world.
The United States, we allowed China to the World Trade Organization. We're now going to offshore to them. They're effectively the Saudi Arabia of manufacturing. We're going to get low-cost labor from them. They're going to pump out products the way Saudi pumps out oil. But it's good because we've won. It's the end of history. Francis Fukuyama, it's good. And even though they're a one-party system, they're embracing American-style capitalism, and they're going to converge with us. And we're all going to be one big happy family. But the Chinese have other designs.
China's a proud country with 5,000-year history, with a population that's 3 to 4 times the size of that of America. They were just never going to fit into the picture the way that we thought of Pax Americana. They want their own system. I do think we sort of made this historic error. We also totally took our eye off the ball. Throughout the 2000s, we could have been holding China to account and really emphasizing the spirit and the words of the World Trade Organization. But instead, the whole decade was spent on war in the Middle East and then reacting to the financial crisis. And during that time, China was just able to think about the one thing, the Nietzschean rise to power through manufacturing, and nobody was particularly paying attention. And I don't even think Apple was really paying attention until Xi Jinping sort of forces them to in March 2013.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us now is Patrick McGee. He's the San Francisco correspondent for the Financial Times. And he's a best-selling author. The title of the book is Apple in China, The Capture of the World's Greatest Company. What a phenomenal book. And I'll just tell you, Patrick, I was at the Chalk History Festival in England. Okay, so this would be like Southwest England. I was at a table. I gave a presentation. I was at a table. There was a gentleman across from me and said, "What are you reading now?" And I said, "Blah, blah." And he said, "Well, you should add Apple in China to your list." And so I downloaded it on my Kindle and my Audible, and I started listening to it on the flight back home, and didn't stop listening. I thought it was probably the best. It's the best business book of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll tell you that. And I tell you, and I've read a lot of really good business books. So congratulations on that. But let's go to you. You are a reporter and you write books, and you've got the New York Times and The Economist saying that this is one of the best books in the year. I'm saying I think it's the best business book of the year. So what's the formula, Patrick? We have a lot of writers that listen. What are we doing wrong as a group of writers?
Oh, that's funny. I mean, well, the premise of the book was, in a sense, to take a company that I think we all think we know because of best-selling biographies of Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive, and to a lesser degree, Tim Cook, but to be able to sort of reframe the whole story just by asking, well, how do they actually make their products? And to be honest, I think it's bizarre, and I indict myself here, along with basically every other journalist that covers Apple, because I didn't do it for 4 years, with not covering that story. I mean, I think everyone knows that Apple products are built in China, but I don't think anyone's really asked the proper questions. Well, why are they built there? What did China offer? And frankly, where was Apple building them beforehand? And also, what can we learn from Chinese industrial policy? I mean, there was just so many things that were unanswered. So, I mean, my favorite reviews of the book are people saying, like, why would I want to read a book about supply chains? Or I already know the Apple history. And then just being stunned at the level of sort of novel detail that's introduced really just in the opening pages. But then I think that cadence kind of keeps up the whole time. But to answer your question more directly, I think because the book is really interview based more than anything else, I'm asking people that worked at Apple and often were in the weeds, on the ground, actually performing the task. So it's less about sort of the grand strategy, the likes of Jeff Williams or Tim Cook. It was the people that had to enact the policies on the ground. And I probably think too many books are based on just like the top 5 or 10 people who are making the decisions and not on who's actually being deployed into the field making those decisions. And that's basically where the whole story is for my book, but it's probably the case for really any business.
Well, I mean, there's so much there. I guess what I would say that I loved about the book, in addition to everything you just said, is there's an improbable outcome here. Apple's not doing well. Emilio's got Apple on the ropes. He's trying to get Steve back to the company. Of course, people are ambivalent about Jobs coming back to the company. Michael Dell, who helped me get Skybridge started, my company, always regrets saying, if you remember at Comdex, what did he say famously at Comdex in 1970? Do you remember what he
He
said?
was asked, what would you do if you were in charge of Apple? And he
And
basically said, I'd sell all the factories, all the assets, and give the money to shareholders. I mean,
that's
he
what he
thought the
said.
company was dead.
He
The
said the
thing
cash
is,
is on the balance sheet. They should, and of course,
yeah,
what Steve Jobs famously did is when he crossed the market capitalization of Dell, he took those statements and he put them out to all at Apple because that was Steve's personality. And but what I mean by the book, though, is this is an improbable story. If you landed from Mars and you started the book, didn't know who Apple was, you said, okay, this company's going bankrupt. This company is in disrepair. It's got a great operating system. It's had some neat, forward-thinking technology, but the company's going bankrupt. And then these guys revitalized the company and they returned to the ethos of what made Apple great. There's a story in the book I'd like you to recant for my viewers and listeners, if you don't mind, and that is the production of the multiple color Macintoshes and how they've got to get them up on the assembly line, and then they got to figure out which colors are going where, and how masterful that was done by these engineers.
that's funny. I've never been asked to recount this question. So how many of the details I
There's a
know?
reason because I'm going to add some narrative to it. But
Yeah, okay.
tell us about what they did there.
So let me say, because this is also a Michael Dell story. So let me just say two things about Michael Dell. So one, I think the reason why Michael Dell's comments hurt Steve Jobs is really that they were accurate. I mean, he was pinpointing something that was really quite true. And I was able to sort of verify that myself because one riddle I was trying to solve is that Steve Jobs is actually offered the Apple CEO position, a position he had never had before, right? Lots of people think he was CEO in the late 70s or early 80s. He never was. So when he's offered the Apple CEO role in July 1997, he doesn't want it. He won't take the role. And it's because he thinks the company's about to die and he doesn't want to be burdened with the death of the company. And then what changes his mind is sort of the subsequent narrative that I'll skip over for now. But that's why Michael Dell's comments hurt. Okay. Dell was the logistics champion at the time. And this sort of like is the culminating thing that happened over the course of 10 or 15 years where the IBM PC, the whole revolution that comes out of the 1981 computer, is that Apple is being bested by companies that are not playing Steve Jobs' game. What he cares about is user interface, the graphic computer, the GUI, the graphic user interface, the usability of it all, and all that. And nobody else is playing that game. They're all doing logistics and distribution on a scale and at a sort of efficiency that Apple's unable to compete with. And that's what's going to kill the company in 96. So when Apple really gets its stuff together and begins making the first Bondi Blue transparent computer, but then a whole rainbow of colors based on the Lifesaver colors to some extent, Foxconn is able to really engineer the hell out of this and really help Apple. So they sort of out Dell. So Dell would sell a bunch of computers in the same format, but if you wanted to customize them, their distributor would have to sort of take them off the production line and then tweak them on a different production line. And Foxconn found a way to basically do all the customization on a single line. So it was a big upgrade, but it was an upgrade born out of necessity because, of course, none of the Apple computers really looked alike. You had these 5 different colors. Nobody had ever done that before. So they found ways of basically like starting the plastic injection molding only when the order was actually placed. So instead of doing like 100 blueberry computers and then 100 strawberry variants, you could just do the orders as they came. I mean, this is sort of typical in the automotive industry, but nobody had really done it for the PC industry. You didn't have to do it in the PC industry because there wasn't enough variation. Apple demanded it.
The reason I'm bringing it up is I feel like it gave the company its mojo back in terms of product design and the implementation of the product design through the supply chain, and gave them more confidence to explore other products that ultimately became the reason why they're one of the most, if not the most successful company in the world. And so that's the reason I wanted you to bring it up. But you do something else in this book, and that is you explain the People's Party. You explain the Chinese Communist Party in the book, and I'm gonna test something on you. I'd like you to either push me back or agree with me or disagree with me. So the United States, we allowed China to the World Trade Organization. We're now going to offshore to them because they're effectively the Saudi Arabia of manufacturing. We're going to get low-cost labor from them. They're going to pump out products the way Saudi pumps out oil. But it's good because we've won. It's the end of history. Francis Fukuyama, it's good. And even though they're a one-party system, they're embracing American-style capitalism, and they're going to converge with us. And we're all going to be one big happy family in the mercantilist capitalist system. But the Chinese have other designs. They end up taking the technology. When I visited China in my 30s, I'm 61 now, but in my 30s, they say, okay, we want to do technology transfer. You've heard that buzzword all the time. And that's what Apple did for China. They opened the door to all of this wonderful engineering and all of this technology, and they knocked it off. And they've done things, frankly, better than we do. And by your book, I think the number was 28 million. You said that the 28 million people were trained, which is greater than the entire workforce of California. So react to that. Do I have that right? The Americans thought, hey, we'll use them as a manufacturing center. They'll never grow into a competitive economy. Or did we always think they were going to be a massive economy like they are today?
There's a lot of short-sightedness, of course, on the part of the American politicians, but also the American engineers and the Apple team in particular. I don't think we think in terms of 20, 25-year increments, and I think that actually comes pretty naturally to China. So that's one thing. But it was also that you have to remember there was great success in integrating the world. I like this quote, "Where commerce doesn't cross through borders, armies do." And that was sort of what Pax Americana was built on after World War II. We didn't have to help Germany after defeating the Nazis. We didn't have to help the Japanese, but we did. The Brits set up Volkswagen, essentially. Volkswagen was born in Germany before the war, but it only became sort of the hippie company that we all know it to be with the rise of the Beetle and everything afterwards. And it's because the Brits went in and really trained the German factory workers and sort of kept everything going and injected capital where needed. And America did that with West Germany, with Taiwan, with Korea, with Japan. And the result was really building up this like thriving global capitalist world. We thought we were going to do the same thing with China, but China's a proud country with 5,000-year history, with a population that's 3 to 4 times the size of that of America. They were just never going to fit into the picture the way that we thought. We thought they were a little puzzle piece that would fit in. They're a puzzle piece that's like bigger than the puzzle, right? Or at least half the size. And so I just think that China has a certain pride that never was going to sort of accept the terms of Pax Americana. They want their own system. And it's hard to begrudge them for that. I mean, it's kind of proper for them to think of themselves the way they think of themselves. And so I do think we sort of made this historic error. But the other thing worth knowing is that we also totally took our eye off the ball. I mean, throughout the 2000s, we could have been holding China to account and really emphasizing the spirit and the words of the World Trade Organization. But instead, the whole decade was spent on war in the Middle East and then reacting to the financial crisis. And during that time, China was just able to think about the one thing, the Nietzschean rise to power through manufacturing. And in a sense, nobody was particularly paying attention. And I don't even think Apple was really paying attention until Xi Jinping sort of forces them to in March 2013.
It's rough, though. It's a rough story because you've got a Mormon missionary. Forgive me, Patrick. I can't remember his name.
John Ford, my favorite character.
Okay, so he's going to open these stores. Okay, so this is and then you have the Gang of Eight, who is trying to figure out a way to placate the Beijing government or the Chinese government, and they're losing. They're losing. They realize that they have to do backflips for China, and they have to conform and comport to China. So much so that they're telling Jon Stewart when he joins Apple Studios or Apple Plus, leave the Chinese jokes out of the equation, right? I mean, this is what's going on. So it's a Gordian knot, the story. It's a story about two people that need each other, but the Apple executives really don't understand the size and scope and the leverage that the Chinese government has over them. Do I have that wrong?
No, I think that's all right. And I think the thing that people that maybe haven't read the book but still have thoughts about what's inside the book get wrong is they'll say, well, look at the iPhone Air, right? And Apple's doing so well. It is the third world's most valuable company. why are you saying that this is wrong? And of course, my point is not that this hasn't worked out for Apple or China. It's worked out brilliantly for both of them. But during the last 30, 40 years, we've completely hollowed out our own manufacturing capacity. We frankly have hollowed out Mexico's manufacturing capacity. And so there's all this collateral damage or negative externalities to the successful relationship. And the result is that not only is Apple reliant on Chinese high-end manufacturing, but basically all Western corporations are. And even when it comes to something like warfare, if it's going to be drones, if it's going to be other forms of gadgetry that involve fabricating semiconductors, Apple's played a large role in facilitating the transfer of knowledge on just a totally epic scale. And just to sort of throw in the number that if readers aren't familiar with it, yeah, so Apple has said in its own public documents that it's trained 28 million people since 2008. And actually, the number was updated a few months ago, and I just had it noticed. It's now 30 million people because they added 2.5 million, which gives you a sense of how magnificently large the workforce in hardware, sub suppliers and suppliers working for Apple is, but also the churn, right? If you had 3 million people in the Apple supply chain, but it was only going up by 100,000 each year in terms of how many people had been trained, that would tell you that the vast majority of people are staying on every year. But actually, they're not. You tend to work for Apple. An Apple supplier for 8, 12, 16 weeks, and then you move on to something else, and then they have to train somebody else. That's how the numbers get so ridiculously high.
I mean, it's mind blowing when you really think about it. And I don't want to make this political, but unfortunately, there's a little bit of politics in this, and that is the politics, in my opinion, of irresponsibility. And so, whatever you think of Donald Trump, there is some kernels of truth in what he's saying.
Certainly.
That over the last 30 years, we sort of abdicated our manufacturing. We offshored into places that have made it, I guess, suspect from a national security perspective. One, do you agree with that? And then two, what should we do about it now?
So I absolutely agree with that. I like to say that I have a no villains narrative. I mean, if I introduce Tim Cook a few chapters in, it's not a negative portrait. It's an understanding of him being this like master of minutiae who, yes, is the opposite of Steve Jobs in certain ways, but they have some similarities where you can see how they would really work together. A total zero tolerance for B players, an obsessiveness over details where Steve Jobs might be in the product conception, but Tim Cook is in the operations, how it all gets done, right? Pages and pages and pages of Excel sheets where everybody's going through every number to make sure that it's all going on the trajectory that I want it to go on. Yeah, look, if there's an indictment, it's not really of Apple per se. I mean, the history is really a series of defendable, rational decisions. It's just where they all sort of culminate and where they all end up. But if there's an indictment of something, it's not Apple, it's shareholder first capitalism, really an idea that comes out of like Milton Friedman and the University of Chicago in the 70s and 80s and gets embraced. Yeah, I guess initially by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, but really I think is later embraced by Bill Clinton and a whole host of other people. It really becomes the American consensus. Where we are now is so tricky because I'm like this, happy-go-lucky, golden retriever Canadian, and yet the book is pretty pessimistic. I mean, I just don't think we're going to compete with China in terms of manufacturing anytime soon. And so, my advice to the administration is that, like, take India as a win. Like, I get it that it's perfect if you can decouple from China and the jobs go back to like a district where, you need more votes and such. But just decoupling from China alone is a win. So if you can get stuff made in India or made in Mexico, like that's sort of good enough, as it were. So I highly disagree with the idea that if it's going to India, we're not benefiting. I think we are because we do care about the global order, not just the 50 states. So there's that. The other thing is just a recognition of all the ways in which the jobs just aren't going to come back here. I mean, Zhengzhou alone, what Apple calls iPhone City, has 400,000 people assembling iPhones. Like, there's just no place in America where that's remotely even close to happening, and it's never going to happen. Maybe you could talk about special economic zones where people that are fleeing Honduras wanted to get over the Trumpian wall and need a job in a desperate place or in a desperate situation. Maybe they could go set some special economic zones where that kind of work could be done. But I don't hear anything about that sort of thing. So I think the quicker we realize that the jobs aren't coming back to America, the more we're going to have practical policies in place. And so unless you want China being absolutely dominant and even more dominant into the future, then I think we need to be supporting efforts in Mexico and in India. Some of it should be in the United States, to be clear, but the whole gamut is not going to be there. And I don't like the idea that that has to be the answer, because it's such a fanciful answer that it's just never going to happen. You're just setting yourself up for failure.
So listen, it's very well said, and you make these points in the book brilliantly. Let's go to the apple squeeze, as you call it. What is the apple squeeze? Explain it to us, and what's the significance of it?
Yeah, this might be the sort of biggest contribution to Apple history in the book. And it sort of takes place in a slow burn way until eventually I coin it the Apple squeeze. But if I go back in history a little bit, it's Terry Guo of Foxconn. He founds this, Taiwanese assembly giant in 1974. And he is the first person to really understand that working with Apple is ridiculously difficult because of the challenge of their aesthetics and the demand for no tolerance in the engineering, etc. But he understands that the challenge is the opportunity, because in order to get to Apple quality levels, Apple will train your entire workforce to get there. And so, yes, they have these ruthless negotiators that really negotiate the hell out of a deal. So your company's really not going to be paid very much. But the intangible payment of the training, right, the sort of tuition-free, on-the-ground hardware equivalent of Ivy League training that's going on, that's the value. And I don't think the Chinese suppliers really get that writ large until 2016. And the value of this is massive for Apple politically, because when Xi Jinping comes into power in 2013 and really goes after Apple through the CCTV. So this is a big episode where Apple gets scolded for 3 continuous weeks, where they really worry that they're going to be blacklisted like Facebook or Google. They're worried about all their operations in the country, plus a $20 billion business that they built up at the time. And the Apple squeeze is Apple's argument to Beijing, which is, it's true that loads of suppliers are being treated in a really dictatorial way, and they're not getting much money out of it. But you don't understand. We're training the hell out of hundreds of factories across the country. So no, we don't have a technical joint venture where sort of half the company is Apple, half the company is Chinese, and they're learning the ins and outs. But while Samsung has maybe 35 of those relationships, we have hundreds of relationships where we're training up all these factories. And the result of those factories training is that they are going on to then use those skill sets, right? Use that machinery in some cases, and they are supplying to Huawei, to Oppo, to Vivo, to Xiaomi, etc. And so my argument is essentially that Apple ends up being the biggest supporter of Made in China 2025, which is Xi Jinping's ambitious plan to sever dependence on the West. That's sort of an extraordinary claim. I think it's pretty well backed up in the book. And so, just to simplify greatly, the Apple squeeze is, we're not going to pay you much, but we're going to train the hell out of your entire workforce.
And it's going to lead to tremendous amounts of positive externalities for the Chinese government and the Chinese workforce and disposable income in China. So it worked out really well.
Yes.
I mean, again, it worked out really well for China. So let's go to Tim Cook. What's the legacy of Tim Cook?
Well, the conclusion
Gets a
of the
lot of
book is,
passes. I mean, we're just going to be honest, okay? He
yeah.
gets a lot of passes due to his demeanor. He gets the benefit of the doubt from a lot of people. What's his legacy?
So I say that the legacy is unwritten. And it's in part because I'm trying to be fair, and it's in part because I don't know the future. I mean, in the event that China annexes Taiwan, and therefore TSMC is no longer able to produce chips that are used in every Apple product you can think of, and you have no iPhone for the next couple of years, I mean, then Tim Cook's legacy would deeply be put into question, because he, more than anyone else, is the person who consolidated operations into both China and Taiwan, right? China for sort of everything, and Taiwan for chips. But I don't know that that's going to happen, right? And so, one could see that Tim Cook continues to have the sort of legacy he has today, which is some sort of demigod of capitalism, right? When Apple became worth $3 trillion, I sort of stunned myself and then stunned readers of the Financial Times by calculating that the value added in terms of market cap was $700 million a day from when he became CEO in 2011 to the first trading day of 2023. So there's all sorts of reasons to believe that he is just an exceptional CEO, and, a worthy successor to Steve Jobs. But of course, what I worry about is that the decisions he has made have actually been pretty detrimental to Washington and to America standing on the world stage. But I'm writing the narrative a little too early to conclusively state that. I don't know how things are going to pan out. But my comparison is that of Jack Welch, who was named Manager of the Century by Fortune magazine in 2001 for leading GE for 20 years, from 81 to 2001. And then, the biography of him 5 years ago is called The Man Who Broke Capitalism. That's
David
quite
Gallis.
a downfall. And I worry about that same thing happening for Tim Cook.
Yeah, I interviewed David, and I think there's a lot to be true, but there's a revision always later on of what that person is thought of. I guess the one thing I was dying to interview because I wanted you to react to this is because you say there's no chance that the iPhone is ever going to be made in the United States, and I believe that. Is there something going on, though, where they're resting on their laurels a little bit? Meaning, my iPhone 14, which is 3 or 4 years ago, it's a great product. I'm saying it isn't. The 17 that I just purchased. Look, I'm an Apple file. I own an Apple Watch, an Apple, 2 iPhones, several iPads. I'm talking to you from an an Apple Mac.
Yeah.
So I'm an Apple person, but it's been a gradualism of innovation. There's really been no brand new products. I look at Samsung or even what Huawei's done in mainland China, they seem to have been more innovative. If I'm wrong about that, push back on me. But I feel like they don't have that innovation spark that they had under Steve Jobs. Am I wrong?
No, I agree with you. And I would say, Johnny Ive left Apple in 2019, and the office of Chief Design Officer remains vacant. I mean, that is a devastating thing to even just sort of digest.
Right.
6 years without a chief design officer for a company that is a whole sort of section at the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, the things that they've created have been absolutely phenomenal, and I do think that they are resting on their laurels, to quote you. The nuance here is that Steve Jobs was the product visionary of the last century, and he was the person who appointed Tim Cook. In other words, I don't think that was Tim Cook's role to play. His role was to sort of take what Steve Jobs had already done, continue to iterate them on an annual basis, but really just ramp up the scale and the distribution around the world. I would say by 2023, it was mission accomplished, and Apple sort of realized that the pendulum had begun to swing in the other direction. And so the criticism of Tim Cook, I think, has always been tired until now, because now, in fact, you do have companies, OpenAI, Perplexity, a whole host of companies that are doing things that are really innovative in the product space, really innovative with artificial intelligence. And whatever the qualities of Tim Cook are, product design, product vision, and AI are not among them. And I worry that with him at the helm, they don't have someone to play that role. And so I would actually call for a new CEO of Apple.
And you'd want somebody more innovative or more execution oriented? Who would you want?
Yeah, more product focused. I don't think you need someone who's execution oriented. That's baked into the entity that is Apple.
That figured out.
Yeah.
Okay, so
absolutely.
we're down to what I call my 5 words. My producer and I, Holly, we pick 5 words from your book, and then we ask the author to give us a 1, 2, or 3 sentences, sort of the first thing comes to your head. Okay. So if I say the word China, Patrick, you say what?
Competent, ruthless, authoritarian, long-term oriented, and creative.
All of those things, and eventually self-sufficient, self-contained.
Yeah, in a scary way. Yeah.
I think they're going to get there, and I think the West is going to be like, whoa, we put the Frankenstein monster on the table. We gave a little bit of electricity into the bolts, and that thing is getting bigger than us. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to America. So I mean the United States of America, and since you're a Canadian, let's say North America.
Innovative. Divisive. What I mean by divisive is polarized. The politics far too polarized. Straitjacket comes to mind.
It's an uneducated workforce, though, no?
Yeah, there's a better word for that, though. I mean, decadent, I think I would go with.
Okay.
Right? We don't have the same hunger that Apple found in the Chinese workers 25 years ago, and I think continues to find today. And in a kind of neutral way, I'm saying decadent. We're just at a stage of capitalism where we just don't have people that will quote unquote eat bitterness the way that Xi Jinping is advocating.
There's a great economic concept called the paradox of early progress. So hear me out for a second. So we build the first airports. So that's great. Now we're flying around. Other people are not flying around. But now the airport was built in 1930. And so we keep layering on a 1930 airport. The Chinese build an airport in 2025. It's gleaming. It's got great Wi-Fi. It's got great cellular connectivity. It's got great rails. But it's the paradox of early progress, right? We're layering on top of something that's 100 years old, and they're starting de novo, and it's very hard to compete with that.
I think that's the military problem right now. We're sort of adding in AI systems and so forth, whereas the Chinese are sort of building them carte blanche. That gives them quite the advantage.
Yeah, so I just wonder from a policy perspective, if we need to scrap some certain things and just here's how we would do things without these legacy systems in place. But that's another podcast for your next book on how we're going to return America to its vitality.
You're closer to the truth than you realize.
Okay, let's go to Tim Cook.
I think he's competence incarnate.
Yep.
Hardworking. I have to put these two together as ethical but blind. Mr. Spreadsheet. And I got to throw in that he's a bit cold.
In a good way, cold?
Well, I suppose it can be in a good way. He doesn't lose his shit. But no, he's kind of the cold, calculating, unempathetic type.
Well, I mean, some have called him Tim Apple, right? And I think he's been masterful as Tim Apple. Because just think about it for a second. He's a guy that I don't know, probably was in love with many of Trump's ideas and many of Trump's things that he does, but he's in there. He's given him gold. I don't know. He gave him that 24 karat gold platform, that podium and stuff. I don't know. You tell me. Am I wrong?
I mean, the fantasy press release that if I could wake up to that would just please me to no end would be that Tim Cook has resigned from Apple and is realizing how much America needs to do and that he has a certain skill set that could really help. And so that he ends up heading Doge. I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, you never know in this country. That's the great thing about the country. All right. Last word. I'm going to give you the last word. I say the word Apple. You say what?
I don't have a creative answer here. Honestly, the term that's coming to mind is just China, which is no good for the author of Apple in China. I'm not all that bearish on Apple. It's not that I want to say lack of innovation or something like that. I think the last week's press release and performance, the two phones was a pretty good one, and at least
me too.
In the judgment of the last 5 years. I don't know what I say for Apple.
I mean, look, the phone's camera sensational.
But captured is probably the best word I could say.
Yeah, when I hear Apple, I hear large, and I hear cumbersome now, and I can't channel Steve Jobs because I'm just not as smart as him. But I'm wondering if he would want to dent Apple some way. If he would want to put the cardiac clamps on Apple and shock it a little bit into some shake some things loose. Who the hell knows? I mean, one of the things that you said in the book, which I found brilliant about Jobs, is that when he got back to Apple, I think he was more focused on the engineers. I think he was more focused on team building. He also shot their most successful product, right? He took the iPod, which is helping the country grow and revolutionize the music system. Boom, he shot it and put it in the phone. A lot of guys wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have had the guts to do that, And so I have a huge admiration for him. This is a phenomenal book, by the way, and I congratulate you for writing it. The title of the book is Apple in China, the Capture of the World's Greatest Company. But it's more than about this company. It's about the last 3 decades of American business decision-making, American political policy, and the unsuspecting rise of China. It seems like a fait accompli now, but it didn't feel that way in the 90s. So many of these people that were making these decisions, and you very aptly point that out in the book. So I applaud you for writing it, and thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Anthony.
If you've met a kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism, and it went from about 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000 when I was diagnosed to now 1 in 36, 3 times higher among boys, even higher among minorities. And that number is increasing still, and nobody knows why. The thing that I love about the story is your personal resilience. You say something in the book as a dad, and I have 5 children, that really hit me right in my chest. You said that you had a crushing sense of invisibility as a child, and you were told by teachers and principals and others that you were weird, and you got to overcome all of this. So talk about that. Talk about how you go from that to being an internationally recognized news journalist. I didn't understand how to interact in the world, and I'm still learning it. It meant for me crushing isolation. It meant for me humiliation by teachers and kids. It meant for me that for 12 years, my dad was not only my best friend, but my only friend. I understand what he did and how much he sacrificed. And all of the nights that I would come home humiliated from school, and I would take out my anger and my frustration and my unhappiness on my dad, and I would cry myself to sleep. And I didn't know this until now. He would be up in your room and talking to you all night, and he would come downstairs and I would have gone to sleep. 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, my mom would figure out that my dad wasn't in bed, and she'd walk out to the living room, all pitch dark, and she would see him sitting on the couch crying himself. Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci, and joining us is a friend of mine, Leyland Vetter. He is the chief Washington anchor for News Nation, but he's written an incredible book, which I predict will be a bestseller. The title of the book is Born Lucky, A Dedicated Father, A Grateful Son, and My Journey with Autism. Wow, what a title. I want to go to you for a second. We've known each other a long time. We worked together at Fox. You've been gracious to me. I've been on your show both at Fox and News Nation. You've reported from war zones, the White House. But in this book, you're sharing an incredible personal story about your very own childhood. We're going to get into all elements of it, but why? Why was now the time to tell us this story? Well, it was unbeknownst to us, Anthony, that so much was going to be focused on autism at this moment, right? With RFK and with the discussion of a cause and is there therapeutics and how to deal with children who have special needs, whether it be autism or ADHD or bullying or whatever it is. The why was simple, is that more and more kids are getting diagnosed. There's no discussion about the cost of diagnosing kids, right? There's no discussion about, well, what does it mean when kids think that, hey, I'm different? What does it mean when teachers teach and treat kids differently? What about when kids treat kids differently? So we're at a reckoning in what parenting in America means. Is it gentle parenting where anyone who has issues is put in bubble wrap? Or are we going to once again realize that great things and great people come out of real adversity and persevering through adversity? So the idea behind the book, it's about me, really. It's my story, but it's not for me. It's for parents and to give parents hope. Unlike what my parents had. My parents, when I was diagnosed, were completely hopeless and they felt helpless. This proves that there is real hope. Okay, so you do not express yourself today, 2025, as somebody that's autistic, but you do write about in the book that at the age of 3, you were not speaking. Your dad, Mark, sells his company and decides to dedicate his life to, I guess, being a full-time coach is the way you describe it. So I want you to go to that part of the book. I want you to go to the origin story and how your parents are figuring out that you have autism and how do they help you deal with this in the modern world. It's a great question. And there were very clear signs that I was different. No kids would ever invite me to play dates. No kid, my parents would never see me playing with a kid. But there was this one moment, you show in the book where we're at this dude ranch. It's families come for a week in Arizona or whatever. And it's a Saturday. Everybody's there. There's the big
field or lawn in front of the main house of the dude ranch, and everybody gets there, and I'm like 5 or 6 years old, and everybody starts playing. All the kids have a pickup soccer game. And everybody's laughing and having fun, and I'm sort of running into kids, and I'm hitting kids, and kids want nothing to do with me, and they push me down, and it's very clear to my dad, who's watching sort of with all the other dads, that I'm much more like a repellent effect of a magnet than the attraction part of the magnet, right? You put two magnets together, they either click or they kind of push apart. I was the push apart. And my dad looks at my mom and says, "We got a real problem here." And he could just see that I could not interact with kids my own age. And he said, at that point, I realized, and he said to my mom, "We've got a very rough, at the time, it was about 12 or 14 years ahead of us." So we write in the book, I show you in the book how he takes that moment, understands that it's going to be bad, says to my mom, he goes, "This is going to be really difficult," and then goes about trying to figure out what to do about it. There was a request by the school that I was at to have me evaluated because I had some of these very sort of peculiar issues. Couldn't interact with kids my own age, was, kind of very angry and aggressive physically, but at the same time, I could interact with adults on a fairly normal basis. And so they take me to a psychology testing center. And you know what it's like, the little waiting room with stale coffee and the vinyl chairs and everything else. My parents were waiting for me. And then the psychologist comes out with me after the test. Results of the test are this, a lot of different issues, but one of them is on that IQ test that's two halves of a test. On one half, I'm genius, and on the other half, I'm mentally retarded. So a 20-point spread is a learning disability. My spread was 70 points. Parents get taken into the little conference room. They all sit down. We've all been in those little medical conference rooms. And the woman says to my dad, "It's very difficult to know what's going on inside his head." She said, at the time, he has pervasive developmental disorder, social blindness. There were all these names for it that we now know to be autism. Back then, that's not how it was diagnosed. And my dad goes, "Is there anything we can do?" And the desperation of a parent who wants to help their child. And the woman goes, "Generally not." And he goes, "Anything, please, anything." And she said, "Well, if the kid is very smart," which in some ways I was, "and if he wants it, you can work with him." But that was all she said. That was all that's all my dad was given. And he said, "Okay." And at that point, he decided, as you pointed out, sold his companies. It was very successful at the time. And he said, "I knew you didn't have any friends, so I was going to become your friend." Never told a soul about the diagnosis, never asked for a special accommodation, never put any effort into getting me counseling or therapy or tutors or anything like that. He said, no one else is going to care what's wrong with you. They're only going to care that you're weird or different or whatever. And I think you can be more. And if you're going to have a successful life, I have to adapt you to the world, not adapt the world to you.
So, I mean, Leyland, there are lots of increased cases of autism.
Yep.
A lot of people are trying to figure out the causes of autism. The FDA is now talking about potentially uses of Tylenol was one of the contributors. Your story is an unapologetic one, though. It's like, it's a deal with it story. You mentioned bubble wrap. Your dad is not a bubble wrapping sort of a person.
No,
Okay.
it was not.
Okay. So we have the problem. I'm going to deal with the problem, and I'm going to help my son come out of the problem. But your own description, you're running over. So what is a distinct characteristic of autism? Because there's a scene in the book which is very touching. Your dad is touching his watch.
Yep.
To try to signal to you certain things. So what are the manifestations of the behavioral traits of autism, and how did your dad help you develop the emotional cues that sometimes people that have autism don't develop intuitively?
It's a great question. And one of the two major autism society, one of the two major autism groups, either Autism Society or Autism Speaks, has this saying that if you've met a kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. And you point out rightly, Then it went from about 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000 when I was a kid with diagnosed to now 1 in 36. 3 times higher among boys, even higher among minorities. And that number, relatively speaking, is increasing still. And nobody knows why. As you point out, there's been some reports about what may contribute to it, but no definitive studies. So what my dad realized at the time, there was very little work, but what manifested with me was that I was unable to get along in any way, shape, or form. Example, when I was in 5th grade, and I write the story in the book, my dad knows how much I'm struggling in school. I write in the book how he comes over to my 5th grade PE class to see me. And he knew the PE teacher from a football program at another school. It's, nice little school. PE, fields are out back down this sort of hill, and you look down over the fields. And he says to the coach, he says, "Hey, how's my boy doing?" And Jim Hoots goes, he's doing better. I think today's a good day. And my dad goes, "Oh, that's great. Let's go see him." And the coach goes, "I don't think that's a good idea." My dad goes, "Why not?" Hoots goes, "Well, I had to put him with the girls. And that's what I have to do. I have to have him play with the girls all day because the boys are too mean to him." So I could not get along with someone my own age. Someone touched me. I thought they were trying to hit me, so I'd start a fight with them. I kind of looked funny, terribly cross-eyed, so sort of relentless bullying there, and had no understanding of social interaction. So you asked the question, and you can imagine how my dad's feeling now with his 5th grader playing with the boys, and my dad had been quite a gifted athlete. As a 5th grader, my dad says, "Okay, how do I teach Lucky how to interact with people?" And one of the things he would do is we'd go to lunch. We're going to lunch with Mr. Scaramucci. Okay. So I love to talk to adults. I could talk to adults about adult things because my dad was my only friend. So I was a mini-me. So I would start in, before we even sat down, asking you about your business or bugging you about politics or whatever it is. "Why do you hate Trump so much, Anthony? And I've seen what you did with this," and on and on and on. Mr. Scaramucci. And
You don't have enough time in this podcast for me to answer that question.
I know, but we would at lunch, and I would try it. And then and it would be specific questions. It'd be like, when you were in the West Wing, where was your office? Okay, what was your office look like? And it just was incessant. And he would tap his watch, and that was my signal to stop talking, but also to bookmark the moment. So it wasn't embarrassing me, right? It wasn't being like, "Little boy, be quiet," or "Lucky, be quiet." It was tapped his watch. I realized time to stop, and I would wait, 5-10 minutes, whatever, and I'd start bugging you again with more questions. This would be about business. And then he'd tap his watch again. And then afterwards, we'd almost go back through it like watching game film. And so he'd say, "Okay, so Lucky, when Mr. Scaramucci was talking about, what he was doing this weekend and where he was traveling, why did you think it was important to ask him right then about the White House?" "Well, I don't know, Dad. That's what I want to talk about." "Right, but do you understand that that's what, he and I were talking about this?" It sounds small, but it was sort of teaching me the very basics of the human social interaction and becoming a student of it rather than it coming naturally as it does to someone like you.
So that's the most fascinating part about it, because no one would know that you grew up like this if you're interacting. But do you find yourself now intuitively having these social cues, or do you find that you're living in a rules-based mind where you're hearing something, you're saying, "Okay, this is the appropriate thing to do at this moment," or not?
It's a great question. And this may sound calculating on my part, but it's sort of the only way I can interact. I write at the end of the book, I will always have autism. And my dad points out, for parents, whether your kid's autistic or has ADHD or anxiety, any of these issues, or just problems growing up, right? Kids, we are people. This isn't a broken arm. You don't heal. So the book isn't a prescription or a cure, but I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a golf course with my father-in-law, and we were having to leave pretty quickly to go do something. And I was trying to pack my golf bag. And one of the characteristics for me for autism is sort of this intense focus on one task to the point of just tuning out everything else, no matter what is sort of socially required of you. And this gentleman we had played golf with came over to try to talk to me about something, and actually about the book. And I completely ignored him. It was so rude. And I almost knew at the moment that I was doing it, like, I'm so focused on this task, I need to work on it, and I'm outside the golf club, and he's trying to be very nice and talk to me. And I was just rude as the devil. And zipping up the bag, and to the point he just walked off finally, and you could tell he was quite irritated. Rightfully so. And I thought to myself, Jesus Christ, at 43 years old, you still cannot get these things right sometimes. So what I'd say to you is, it is still a learning process for me. It's still a discipline. Now, of course, I sent the guy an apology text and really sorry and on. But it still stuck with me and was an example sort of every day that I have to keep those lessons that my dad taught me that we write about in the book top of mind.
Yeah, normal people have this problem though too. I mean, not normal people, but people that don't have autism. There's nobody normal. I don't mean it like that, but the thing that I love about the story is your personal resilience. You say something in the book as a dad, and I have 5 children, that really hit me right in my chest. You said that you had a crushing sense of invisibility as a child, and you were told by teachers and principals and others that you were weird, or some kids think that you're weird, and then the principal's like, well, I also think he's weird, and you got to overcome all of this. So talk about that. Talk about how you go from that to being an internationally recognized news journalist.
Well,
and congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. The real answer is my dad is the hero in this, right? And I think you'll understand this as being the father of 5 kids, that my parents in 7th grade, so private school that goes 7th through 12th grade. So this was my chance at a fresh start. Gets called in. My parents get called into the principal's office about 3 weeks in. And the principal's sitting there, wooden desk, couple of chairs for the parents, little window looking out on the quad of the school, and says to my parents, look, I'm going to cut to the chase. Everybody here thinks Lucky is weird. Arrow number 1 through my parents' heart, because they think that finally I've got a shot. And she follows up, and frankly, I do too. So my dad realized he wasn't going to get any help from the administration or from teachers or from, the school. And he didn't, he could have easily said, well, Lucky is weird. He's got, these issues called pervasive developmental disorder. And at the time now it was starting to be known as Asperger's, and you need to do all these special things for him, and on and on and on. Dad's common understanding, and I think the theme throughout the book you're talking about, is that adversity needs to be embraced. That so many parents want to pave this really beautiful road for their kids, the easiest road they can. And what parent wants to see their kids struggle? And what Dad knew was that if I didn't struggle, if I didn't face adversity, if I didn't face challenges, I wouldn't be able to face the real world. So 200 push-ups a day, starting when I was about 6 years old, 5 days a week. But it taught me something, which was that every push-up was one push-up closer to a goal, which was after 3 months, if I did all this, I got to go to Disney World. And that was sort of the basis of his standard for me of set goals, set hard goals, but achieve them, and it'll teach you can do hard things. So, you were asked or invited to leave the White House because you disagreed with Donald Trump on a certain few things. I was invited to leave Fox News for similar reasons. And I remember being, in my parents' bedroom, guest bedroom in Florida. I'd almost died of COVID. I'd gotten out of a relationship. I was just as low as you could be. And my dad said, look, he said, you've done this before. There was a teacher in 8th grade that looked at you in front of the whole class and said, if my dog was as ugly as you, I'd shave its ass and make it walk backwards. You got through that. You went to school the next day. You can get through this. And that's that standard and that pressure and that focus of my dad of making me get through hard things, even while he held my hand doing it, that served me very well.
The advice for today. we've got a lot of parents at 1 in 36. You've got a lot of parents that have kids that have ADHD, or they have Asperger's, or they have a form of autism. What's the biggest lesson from your journey that we could apply to people that are dealing with their journey today?
Well, this is different, right? Because it's a parenting book written by a kid, and I don't have a kid yet. So I don't want to, this isn't advice or how-to manual. But what I would say is my book is proof for parents, no matter what your child is dealing with, that there's hope. There's real hope that things get better. And that enormous amount of love, unyielding standards, holding your kid's hand through adversity, not taking the adversity away, can change their lives permanently, and will. George Will wrote the foreword of this. I had the unenviable task of having 240 pages between my dad's afterword, which I think is the best part of this, which was sort of his takeaways for parents and his thoughts, and George Will writing the foreword. But the middle 240 pages were mine, and George Will ended his foreword by saying, "This is proof of the mountain-moving power of parental love." And that, to me, is what really the one takeaway is.
I love it. All right, so we're down to the 5 words of my show here, Leyland. We call 5 words from your book, and then we ask you to react to those words. Okay.
Okay.
So you can give me a few sentences on each, or elaborate as much as you want. I say the word journalism, you think of what?
I think of the relentless pursuit of the truth, without fear or favor. And it comes from my dad, who, when I was a little boy, there weren't expectations. There were no expectations about either schoolwork, or are you going to be a very successful business person as he was, or any of that kind of stuff. But there were 2 expectations. One, that you worked hard, and more importantly, that you had good character. And one time, I still remember, tell the story in the book, when he caught me lying, which was a big deal in my house, and he made me write, "I will tell the truth," 1,000 times out. And that pursuit of the truth has sort of been what I was about when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, and still am.
Are we under threat? The truth, the journalists under threat today?
I think the truth has always been under threat.
More so today?
I don't know about more so or less so. I think the bare knuckle parts of politics are now more apparent. It is no longer waged silently or politely. Look, I covered the Obama White House for Fox News. They were pretty rough too. They just did so more quietly. So I remember being the guy who was the morning reporter at the White House for Fox, and Josh Earnest and others, members of the cabinet, would always do a round robin with every other network, but they wouldn't go on Fox. It was always my job to walk upstairs and, from the lower, the little area down below it, under the briefing room where the broadcast booths are, and say, "Hi, Josh, just need to lodge our complaint that Fox once again has been excluded." And he goes, "Oh, Leland, it's so good to see you. How's your weekend? Blah, 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 blah." And he was all nice about it, but they were doing this. So I don't know. To me, the truth has always been under threat. It's why journalism was the only profession protected in the First Amendment.
All right, you say the word resilience, you say what?
Without it, and without being taught it, right? It's a learned skill. It's not an innate quality. And without being taught it, I don't know how people succeed at anything. It is a necessary component, I think, not only to success, but to a happy life.
Autism.
I don't think we know what it means to everyone. I know what it means to me, which was that I didn't understand how to interact in the world, and I'm still learning it. It meant for me crushing isolation. It meant for me humiliation by teachers and kids. It meant for me that, for 12 years, my dad was not only my best friend, but my only friend. And it also meant to me now that I have the opportunity to help a lot of people.
Leyland Vedder.
That's 2 words, Anthony.
Yeah. All right. See that? Well, I'm improvising.
Okay, so you want to know what I mean to myself?
Yeah, well, if you were describing yourself.
Boy, I'm just glad that my wife isn't listening right now. I am Mark Vittert's son, and that's what this book is, a love letter to my father, and a thank you to explain to him that I understand what he did and how much he sacrificed. And all of the nights that I would come home humiliated from school, like the time the teacher said he'd shave his dog's ass and make it walk backwards, or the teacher who told me in 7th grade choir class, you know what, sing softly. In fact, do not sing at all during the rehearsal for the Christmas pageant in front of 200 kids. And I would come home and I would take out my anger and my frustration and my unhappiness on my dad, and I would cry myself to sleep. And I didn't know this until now, right? I'm 43 years old. When we started writing the book, and my dad didn't tell me, my mom did. She said he would, be up in your room and talking to you all night, and he would come downstairs and I would have gone to sleep. My mom would have. So 2-story house. We're upstairs. My parents' bedroom is downstairs. 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, my mom would figure out that my dad wasn't in bed, and she'd walk out to the living room, all pitch dark, and she would see him sitting on the couch crying himself.
That's very touching stuff, and it's a beautifully written book. I've got 2 last words, and then I'll give you the last word. What about the 2 words, Mark Vittert?
Hero to me, which obviously is my dad. I think what is remarkable about him was that he understood 40 years ago what the world is starting to understand now, that if you put a kid in bubble wrap and make all sorts of special accommodations for them, they won't learn, they won't be more. And my dad thought, I'm going to be more, my son has a chance, and the only chance is if I push him to be more. And my parents didn't tell anybody about my diagnosis. They didn't tell my sister. And my sister recently asked them why. And my mom said, well, we didn't want you, me, my sister, to see your brother as anything other than just who he was. And my dad didn't want anybody to see me other than just who I am. And I think that kind of goes back to that, if there's a reckoning in parenting right now, which I think there is, about how to help kids rather than meet them where they are, he understood that 40 years ago.
Well, it's an amazing story, and I'm so grateful to you for coming on to share it with us. The title of the book is Born Lucky, and it's by Leyland Vittert. But I just think it's a amazing tribute to your dad, but it's also amazing story of hope, resilience. It's a story where I think people could open this up, no matter what they've got going on in their lives, and see some level of direction for themselves. And so I really appreciate you sharing it with us today. Thanks for joining us on Open Book.
Grateful for your interest, Anthony. Thanks for the kind words.